Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Crown and today we are going to have some more stories that I hope that you will enjoy. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now, without further ado, let's go! First story. An entitled kid white pelt gets a cheap lesson from a yellow pelt. Happened to my daughter this summer, short and sweet. This martial art is Taekwondo. My daughter is 10 at the time and has been doing Taekwondo for a while. The particular academy starts kinda slow in pelts for the younger kids to listen dropouts. As they get higher in pelts, it requires much more work in and out of the academy. So she has a lot of time in, even though at the time she's only the third belt. White, low yellow, and yellow. Due to my other daughter's dance lessons, my Taekwondo daughter sits in front of the academy for about 15 minutes after a lesson on Wednesdays, so we can pick both kids up at once. She just sits on a bench, playing games on her phone. I have poor memory, spelling, writing skills, and I'm on mobile. Sequences may have been shortened or altered due to those facts. So I'm getting off work out of town, heading into a motel, and then get a call. It is the instructor at Taekwondo informing me about an event that happened at his academy. The senior master says, "So hey, your daughter punched some kid after class today. Do I need to withhold her from the next pill test if she can't control her actions?" Me, flabbergasted. Well, that doesn't sound like her. What happened?" His aunt said when she picked him up, he had a red mark on his face. So he said that he was showing your daughter some moves, and she couldn't do them right. So she got mad and punched him. Sounds weird. Okay, I'll have to talk to her to see what happened. I'll call you back. So I call her. Hey, what happened to Taekwondo? This boy wouldn't stop bothering me or picking on me. So after a while of me telling him to stop and get away, I slapped him. Okay, so now I believe this. Okay, well, the first person to tell the story gets believed. So when something like that happens, you need to inform someone first. Hopefully he will believe you since you have been around 2 years and that boy just started. So I called the senior master back and I repeat her story. And he tells me, yeah, I thought it strange that a lower pelt will be teaching a higher pelt. Should be the other way around. I'll check the cameras and call you tomorrow. Tomorrow I was still out of town and strangely in the same spot as yesterday when I got a call again. It was the senior master. I checked the cameras. That boy is lucky your daughter just slapped him. He deserved much more than that. She plainly told him to get away many times and he kept on coming back to mess with her. I'll have a talk with him and his aunt about it. I tell him I'm glad you have cameras. That made this easy. I called my daughter and informed her of the good news and how well she did, and she controlled the situation. Later I asked if the boy was still there and she said that she never saw him again. I found out the senior master kicked him out. Unfortunately, we weren't there for that. My daughter is still in Taekwondo and next month she'll be testing for her low blue belt. When it comes to belts, it goes like this. White, low yellow, yellow, low green, green, low blue. She's 11 and tall and strong and not to be messed with, obviously. This story always puts a smile on my face. Next story. Dad helps my friend and me get back at middle school bully. This week was our middle school reunion. Most of us went to the same K-8 school, ages 6 to 14 for our friends across the pond. And while we were all laughing and talking over Zoom, my friend, whom I'll call Janice, brought up this memory. At our schools, with the exception of kindergarten, 2 grades will be paired together. So first and second grades will be taught together. Third and fourth will be taught together. So on and so forth. The 7th and 8th graders had to do a special project every year called Toy Team, or TT. Basically, we will be put into teams and build a specific toy that we could market. Representatives from local businesses will be invited to judge our projects and win awards in various categories. Best presentation, best design, best research, and so on. The idea behind this project was to teach teamwork, ingenuity, creativity, and so on. But in the end, it caused more trouble than it was worse, for reasons I'll get to in a moment. I hated TTU as a passion, the biggest reason being that the boys would take over the building of the toy and the girls did the secretarial work, listing results, surveying the groups, writing final reports, and so on. It wasn't fair, but I was always too afraid to speak my mind and asked to help building, something I've always enjoyed. But 8th grade year was the one that almost broke me because of one kid. Enter Carlos, not his real name. Carlos was in 7th grade but was touted as a math and science genius. He had to go to the local high school to take math and science classes because none of the teachers at our school were qualified to teach at his level. He also prided himself on being a cool kid and had a gang of sycophants follow him around, reaffirming his greatness. In reality, Carlos was a little punk, who honestly should have used a lesson or two in a school of hard knocks. He was a jerk to the highest degree, always looked down on everyone else, and since his parents, who were honestly Lucius and Narcissus Malfoy come to life, defended his actions and threatened everyone around them. Because it was a private school and Carlos' parents were big donors, even the teachers were limited in what they could and couldn't do to discipline him. The worst they could do was detention, but he just shrugged it off. Seriously, unless he killed someone, Carlos was just untouchable. Janice and I were thrilled to be in the same group until we learned we'd be paired with Carlos. Carlos immediately took over the project and bossed Janice and me around. Janice and I both had our own disabilities. She was in a wheelchair and I had a hearing disability that required me to wear an earpiece. Anyways, we were also favorite targets for Carlos and his sycophants. Because, well, we were disabled, quiet, kept to ourselves, and just focused on our work. Carlos proceeded to make our experience in TT miserable. He claimed that because he was a big math and science expert, only he could build our glider and we had to write it down. Janice and I put up with it at first because we knew our teachers would do nothing and it was just an 8-week-long group project. Then one day, during week 6, it happened. We had to test the gliders. Our testing rigs was set up with yardsticks and rubber bands on tables. You'd load the gliders into the rubber bands, pull them back and launch. Then you'd measure how far they flew and make your corrections. Once again, the boys took over and the girls did the recording. Janice and I were making notes when I noticed the rubber band was about to snap due to how stretched out it was. I warned Carlos about the rubber band and to just adjust the glider. When he protested, our teacher, who I will call Mrs. Adams, snapped at him and told him listen to your partners and adjust. Well, Carlos did as said, but he pulled the glider back too far and too fast. As a result, the rubber band snapped. The rubber band not only slapped Carlos in the face but broke our glider to pieces because he pulled it back too far and the force hit the fragile wood. Carlos was pissed and turned his anger on me. "No wonder you suck at math and science," he said. This, in addition to all the stuff going on, broke me. It's true that math and science were my worst subjects because I have a learning disability on top of everything that makes those subjects tough. But I've always loved building and repairing things. My dad is an engineer, and some of my earliest memories were of him teaching me how to fix my toys and encouraging me to experiment with different building things. In addition, I was a total daddy's girl. I wanted to make him proud and I knew that me being bad at math and science was something that stressed him out. So I'm not joking, I ran away, like in those cliché 90s movies. My house was 2 blocks away and I ran there. Fortunately, my teachers knew that there weren't many places I could have gone to, and they called my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, to tell her what happened and to please return me to school. What I didn't know was that Dad was working from home that day. When I ran in, crying and upset, he noticed and went after me. He calmed me down and asked what happened, and I told him everything. about Carlos taking over, about how Janice and I were doing all the hard work and Carlos being a nasty bully, the rubber band snapping and me getting blamed. Dad was quietly hugging me, kissing my forehead. When Dad is quiet, that usually means he's angry. When I looked up, I saw that his mouth was set in a hard line and his eyes were dark. I was scared he was angry at me. I begged him not to be mad at Janice or me because Dad instead reassured me that he wasn't mad at Janice or me. He was mad at Carlos, and he had an idea to teach that little punk a lesson. Dad then called the school, reassured Mrs. Adams that I was okay and that I would spend the rest of the day at home. He also sent an email to not only Mrs. Adams, but Janice's parents detailing this plan of his. Janice's parents and Mrs. Adams were game. After we heard it, Janice and I were smiling ear to ear, even though we knew we had to put in the work all by ourselves. The next day, Mrs. Adams pulled Carlos, Janice and me aside and said, thanks to the glider incident, Carlos was now on his own and had to finish the project by himself. Janice and I would be doing our own project. Carlos was pretty happy about this, because those two slowed me down. However, what Carlos was not thinking about was that since Janice and I were doing all the paperwork, we had all the information. We offered to share our notes with him in an attempt to be fair, but he said it's all in my head, and I don't need it to slow me down. In fact, I bet I can do it even better. We all had to sign a contract that information was not exchanged and witnessed by Mrs. Adams. The next 2 weeks were easily the best of TT for Janice and me. Since we had all the notes, we were able to rebuild the glider in less than a week. Our dads even set up a makeshift glider range for us to test, and we spent an entire Saturday flying the gliders, one in red, the other in blue, which were the most popular colors according to our surveys. As a result, we improved our glider and even made a game out of it, racing them. When Janice's dad mentioned the red and blue gliders reminded him of the Gemini dual-link coaster at Cedar Point, we decided to name the toys after the coaster and make them a 2-for-1. We built a box for our gliders, got our calculations double-checked by not only Mrs. Adams but 2 independent adults as well. Host dads, who were co-workers, signed off on the mass, even adding their proof of work and signing the back. This is important for later. A presentation board with an overview and along with a huge binder showing all of our work. Janice and I worked really hard on this project, and it felt awesome. On our last day, we had a pizza party and sleepover, making bets on what Carlos' reaction was most likely going to be. Presentation day arrived, and this was one of the few days we could wear something else other than our school uniform, so we were dressed in nice outfits to make our presentations. Janice and I were together with our gliders and had big smiles on our faces. We looked at Carlos. We had an actual nice-looking glider, box, presentation board, paperwork and everything. However, he had an anxious look on his face instead of his usual arrogant and cocky one, which made me happier. Presentation day worked like this. The first half of the day would be the representatives walking around and judging who had the best looking gliders, boxes, presentation boards, binders and so on. Then we'd have lunch and come back. The ones who have been selected for the second round would then make their presentations to not only the representatives but the entire class. Janice and I answered the questions asked by the representatives, arriving with confident and clear answers. One of the businesses that attended was the engineering firm that our dads worked for. They were impressed with our presentation and selected us for the second round. Carlos was also selected, and he had a worrisome look on his face when the bell rang. After lunch we returned, and something about the way the binder was sitting made me double-check. Wouldn't you know it? The pages with double-checked calculations and proof of work were gone. Carlos, being the jerk he was, did not keep notes about his experiments, so he decided to steal our work and present it as his own. Janice and I decided to take a professional approach in order to grind Carlos further into the dirt. I went up to Mrs. Adams and the representatives and asked them if they had gone through our binder when we were gone because the calculations and proof of work pages were missing. Mrs. Adams was immediately suspicious as well, given Carlos' behavior, and immediately walked over, took his binder off the table, flipped through it, and found the corrections pages. He had hastily scrawled in his name at the top next to ours, so it looked like he was involved. Mrs. Adams looked at him and said, "Carlos, why did you take the pages?" And he said, "They gave their work to me, remember?" Fortunately, Janice and I included our copy of the signed contract from earlier, saying Carlos had refused use of our information in our binder and pulled it out. At this point, Carlos looked like the kid who denied he had been eating cookies even though he had a ring of crumbs around his lips. "Well, they stole my double-checked work, see?" He shows a proof of work our dads had done. I took it out and put it back. Then Janice looked at one of the men, who I learned later was the supervisor of the team both of our dads were a part of, and she said, "Mr. Lionel, could you please check his proof of work? Our dad signed the back of ours." Mr. Lionel agreed and flipped the page over. Carlos did not notice that our dads had signed the back of the proof of work and included their names. Mr. Lionel nodded. "I know those signatures anywhere," he said before looking at Carlos with a glare that could wilt a flower. "You told me you wanted to be an engineer someday, right?" Carlo could only nod. His face was white. "You are aware that engineers take theft of others' work seriously." Again, Carlos nodded. "And that if you were doing this in a professional setting, you'd not only be fired from the company but blackballed from the industry," Mr. Lionel said, staring down at this kid. Carlos looked like a melted snowman and that he wanted to disappear into the ground. I learned later that Mr. Lionel was a nice man, but man, I could immediately see why our dads respected him in that moment. Mr. Lionel turned to Mrs. Adams and said, "I recommend that he be disqualified from the next round and be made to apologize to these two girls in addition to returning the proofs to them." Carlos did return the paper and apologized for the theft, not looking me in the eye. As a result, not only was Carlos disqualified, but because he cheated, he flunked the project as a whole. Since TT was at least 30% of our science grade, he ended up getting his first D on his report card, which his parents had a freaking field day with until Mr. Lionel sent him a letter telling them what their son had done and that if he didn't shape up, he risked real trouble in his professional life. Janice and I ultimately won Best Design, but the best award was seeing Carlos' ego get knocked down several bigs. He was still a jerk, but was scared of us. Hey, I might be bad at math and science, but at least I know not to be mean to people who might help me someday. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.